How far would you go to protect the people you love when prejudice hides behind a smile? Weddings are supposed to be the most beautiful celebration of love, a moment when two lives intertwine, families unite, and the future sparkles with promise. But sometimes, beneath the glitter and joy, uncomfortable truths reveal themselves, testing not only love but character. Did I end the heart of Northbridge, a picturesque town known for its timeless charm and quiet streets? The much-anticipated wedding of Julian Parker and Camille Davenport had the entire community buzzing. Friends and family gathered from near and far to witness what many called a perfect union. Camille, elegant and detail-oriented, had planned the ceremony down to the last rose petal. Julian, calm and compassionate, was simply excited to marry the woman he loved. Among the bridal party was Renee Wallace, Julian's closest friend since middle school. Their bond was unbreakable. Years of friendship, late-night calls during college, and shared milestones had turned Renee into family. Naturally, Julian wanted her by his side on his big day. And at first, Camille didn't object. That was until she learned that Renee was black. The change was subtle, but undeniable. Camille's enthusiasm dimmed. Her once bright smile flickered whenever Renee's name was mentioned. When Julian brought up dress fittings, she hesitated. One evening, as the sun dipped below the Northbridge Hills, the conversation they'd been avoiding finally surfaced. "A black bridesmaid?" Camille asked, her voice deceptively calm. "I just don't think it fits the aesthetic." Julian blinked, confused. "The aesthetic? I mean the photos, the vibe I'm going for. It's not personal. It's just she doesn't match the rest of the bridal party." Julian's heart sank. In all their time together, he had never seen this side of Camille. He had admired her poise, her intelligence, her attention to detail. But now, all he could see was the cold edge of her prejudice, masked behind the excuse of a color palette. "She's like my sister," Julian said firmly. "Renee's been there for me when no one else was. If she's not in the wedding, I don't think I want the wedding at all." Camille's eyes narrowed. "Are you serious? You'd throw away everything we've built for a friendship?" "This isn't just a friendship," he replied. "It's about respect, about standing up for someone who's done nothing but love and support me. If you can't see that, then maybe we need to rethink this entire thing." The silence that followed was heavy, stretching between them like a chasm neither was ready to cross. The days passed. The tension filtered into every aspect of the wedding planning. Family members began to notice the strain. Whispers rippled through rehearsal dinners and gown fittings. Some of Camille's relatives quietly agreed with her, while others looked on with concern. Julian's side, especially those who knew Renee, grew uneasy. It was clear something wasn't right. Renee, meanwhile, remained quiet. She hadn't expected her presence to stir controversy. She had accepted the bridesmaid invitation with joy, ready to stand beside her best friend. Now she felt like an outsider, unwelcome, unspoken about, yet at the center of a storm. Just days before the wedding, Renee made a difficult choice. She pulled Julian aside and told him she would step down from the bridal party. "I don't want to cause more tension," she said, forcing a smile. "This is your day. Don't let it get ruined because of me." But Julian couldn't shake the unease. Watching someone he loved and respected be quietly pushed aside for something as senseless as skin color made the celebration feel hollow. He began to question everything: Camille's values, their future together, and whether love could survive when silence became complicity. The morning of the wedding arrived, and Northbridge's old chapel stood bathed in golden sunlight. Guests filled the pews, the scent of peonies drifting through the air. But behind the scenes, Julian stood alone in a small dressing room, staring at his reflection that he could hear Camille laughing in the other room, surrounded by bridesmaids. He wondered if she truly understood what she'd asked him to compromise. Renee wasn't just a detail to be omitted. She was a symbol of something greater. Something that, once sacrificed, might unravel everything. Then came the knock. It was his cousin, Elijah. "Time to head in, man. Everyone's waiting." Julian nodded, but his feet didn't move. His heart was a storm, his mind a battlefield of love, loyalty, and principles. And in that quiet room, with only the mirror as witness, Julian made a decision that he opened the door. But instead of walking toward the altar, he turned the opposite direction. The crowd inside the chapel shifted, murmurs rising as minutes ticked by. Camille stood at the entrance, bouquet trembling in her hands, eyes scanning the crowd for the groom who hadn't arrived. And then, someone whispered, "He's not coming." When Julian walked away from the altar, leaving behind stunned guests and a tearful bride, he knew he had made a decision that would follow him for the rest of his life. But what he didn't expect was how much that decision would ripple through the lives of everyone involved. Renee, though emotionally bruised, stood tall in the aftermath. She had never asked Julian to choose sides, but his decision had reaffirmed something she had always believed, that real friendship meant standing up for one another, even when it's inconvenient. Her trust in Julian was stronger than ever, but the pain of being rejected by someone she barely knew, simply because of the color of her skin, still lingered. She had known that prejudice existed, but to witness it so openly, especially from someone who had once been so important to her friend, stung deeply. Julian's emotions were complex. He missed Camille, at least the version of her he had once loved. He had imagined their future together for so long, and the pain of walking away from that dream was overwhelming. But he also knew he couldn't ignore what had happened. Walking away had cost him happiness in the short term, but he believed it was a small price to pay for doing what was right. The years of shared memories, the connection they had once had, it was hard to let go of all of it. But in that moment, he realized the true cost of silence in the face of injustice. Meanwhile, Camille struggled with the aftermath. The empty apartment she returned to felt colder than ever. The silence was deafening, and the absence of Julian was a constant reminder of the day she let her own prejudice destroy something beautiful. She replayed the moment he walked away over and over, trying to make sense of how it all unraveled so quickly. How had she allowed something as trivial as her narrow-minded view of what a wedding should be to overshadow the love she shared with Julian? But over time, the initial sting of embarrassment gave way to a deeper understanding. For the first time, Camille began to question herself, not just her actions, but the mindset that led her to exclude Renee in the first place. She had to ask herself, what had made her think that excluding someone from her wedding based solely on the color of their skin was acceptable? How could she have been so blind to her own biases? Camille reached out to a counselor and began attending sessions focused on confronting bias and unlearning prejudice. Slowly, painfully, Camille began to change. Weeks turned into months. Camille sent Julian a message. It wasn't just an apology, it was an admission. She told him she was wrong, that she hadn't truly understood how deeply her actions had hurt not only Renee, but him. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She only hoped he'd understand that she was trying to become someone better. The decision to send that message was one of the hardest things she had ever done. She wasn't sure if Julian would ever speak to her again, but she knew that this was the first step in taking responsibility for her actions. Julian took his time before responding. It wasn't easy. His wounds were still raw. But when he finally wrote back, his words are honest. "Thank you for owning your mistakes. I hope you keep growing, not for me, but for yourself." The response wasn't the bomb Camille had hoped for, but it was a start, a recognition of her effort. It gave her the small sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. Renee, too, received a message from Camille. She read it twice before deciding to reply. Her answer was brief, but sincere. "I appreciate your apology. Change doesn't happen overnight, but I see you're trying, and that matters." Renee had always believed in redemption, but she also knew that it was a process. She appreciated the gesture, but deep down, she understood that the road to healing would be long, for both Camille and for herself. Over the following months, Camille's transformation became more visible. She began volunteering with organizations that promoted racial equity and inclusion. She told her story publicly, about how she had once allowed her biases to cloud her judgment, and how it had cost her a man she loved. Her vulnerability struck a chord with others who were afraid to confront their own blind spots. Many reached out, thanking her for sharing her journey, and it inspired others to begin their own self-reflection. But this story wasn't about Camille's redemption alone. Julian had grown, too. In the wake of the broken engagement, he focused on rebuilding his life with intention. He reconnected with old friends, traveled, and poured his energy into writing, a hobby he had long set aside. Through it all, Renee remained a constant presence in his life. Their bond was unshakable, strengthened not only by what had happened, but by the honesty and loyalty that had always defined their friendship. Their friendship had weathered the storm of an impossible situation, and their connection had never been stronger. One evening, nearly a year later, the three of them crossed paths again, at a community event aimed at fostering dialogue across racial lines. It wasn't planned, and for a moment, the air was thick with unspoken memories. Camille looked at Julian and Renee, unsure of what to say, but knowing that silence would only make things more uncomfortable. But then Camille approached them, not as the woman who once tried to exclude Renee from her wedding, but as someone who had done the inner work, someone who had learned the hardest way possible that love without respect isn't love at all. She walked over, her face earnest, her eyes searching for understanding. Renee extended a hand. Camille took it. Julian watched the moment unfold, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. There was still pain in the past, but there was peace in the present. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There was no magic moment that could undo the hurt caused, but there was hope. And sometimes, hope is enough. This wasn't a perfect ending. It wasn't tied neatly with a bow, but it was real. And sometimes real is more powerful than perfect. The story of that wedding day would live on, not as a tale of a celebration gone wrong, but as a moment of reckoning that forced three people to confront who they truly were and who they could become. In the end, it wasn't just about love. It was about courage, about growth, about choosing what's right, even when it's hard, because love that stands up against hate is the kind that truly lasts.